Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Sumner, registered dietitian, focusing on helping men and women end binge eating, end food guilt, and finally say yes to life. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not substitute for medical and personalized advice. Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. And in this episode, I have a special guest here, and her name is Emma Townsin, and she's an intuitive eating counselor. But enough about me talking about introductions. Would you mind telling us more about you, Emma?
Hey, Jonathan. Thank you, of course. And thanks for having me on the podcast. So my name's Emma Townsin, like you mentioned, and I'm a registered dietitian in the UK, and I'm also a certified intuitive eating counselor. So I use an intuitive eating approach to support my clients to eat, really just to eat in a way that feels good for their body and leads to improved well-being and quality of life. I work with clients who experience binge eating, also who experience chronic dieting and just want to move away from the stressful food rules and learn how to nourish their body in a way that really feels good and without those rules, that guilt or shame around food.
Yeah, that's amazing. Making it look like intuitive eating is really helpful for recovery. But for those who don't know, what is intuitive eating?
Yeah. So eating intuitively itself is just really like our natural way that we eat. So it's that innate way that we're born to use our body to guide our eating. And if we consider food is one of our most basic needs that we need to survive. So of course our body is equipped all the way to make sure that we get enough food and enough variety of food as well. The process of intuitive eating itself is for those who have have been taught that they need to follow these external rules around food or been taught these ideals around bodies. And this then creates a disconnect with our body's internal cues. So the process of intuitive eating, it involves as much unlearning as it does relearning. And it's relearning how to get back in touch with our body and let go of all of these kind of ideals um, and rules around food, which are really taking over and creating this fight between what our body's asking for and what we're made to believe is right for our body.
Yeah.
And although intuitive eating itself is focused on eating, as the name suggests, it's actually as much about improving our relationship with food as well as our body and our mind, because we can't separate these. They're all together. They all work together. So we do things as well, like improving body image, removing feelings of guilt and shame and deprivation toward food, as well as eating to our internal cues, things like hunger, fullness, and just honoring the way and noticing the way that food makes us feel as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Like, there's so many things to it. And from listening to what you're saying about intuitive eating and what it is, it seems like it's just basically just listening to your body. But what are the benefits? Like, what what can we get out of just listening to our body? What are the actual benefits of intuitive eating?
Yeah, and you say as simple as it sounds, but it's not so simple, especially in our culture that makes us feel this guilt and shame around food or has created such a distrust that we feel like our body is going to maybe to reach a place that isn't comfortable. We feel like especially around weight as well, it's often our control around food is actually control around our body. We might feel that we can't trust our body to sit at a weight that feels comfortable and supportive for our body or that meets ideals, and that can often be what drives um, things like binge eating and other yes, disordered eating behaviors. But the benefits of intuitive eating, if we look at something, I'll focus on binge eating since this is a binge eating podcast. If we look at something like binge eating and the underlying triggers for binge eating are things like our biological hunger. So if we're not feeding our biological hunger that our body has, that triggers thoughts around food, triggers cravings towards food, and that can lead to something like binge eating. Another trigger is just deprivation around certain foods. So we might be eating maybe enough, but there's certain foods that we think of as good and bad or healthy and unhealthy. And this can lead us to, say, hyper focus on those foods, kind of put them up on this pedestal. And then when we're around them, they become a food that we feel difficult to tune into our body and really listen to how that food feels. And that can lead to eating perhaps more than is comfortable of that food. Then the final generalized trigger around binge eating is our emotional needs as well. So if there's certain emotions that we haven't found a way to cope with, or perhaps they showed up at a time when there was a lot going on and it was an emotion we didn't really have other tools in that moment, food can become a really important coping tool, and that in itself isn't a problem. But if food becomes this kind of long-term coping tool and it's stopping us finding other other tools, that's when we might need a bit of extra support. So intuitive eating, it it ensures that all of these three triggers, it works with all of them. So it firstly ensures that we're getting our biological nutrition that our body needs. And this is whether or not we feel hungry. When we haven't been eating according to our hunger cues, we can often not recognize our hunger or not trust our hunger. But working with an intuitive eating counselor, they'll work with you to support you to get that nutrition, whether you're feeling your hunger or not. It's still so important. It supports you to shift the good and bad food thoughts so that food feels more supportive, peaceful, and we've got these positive thoughts towards food. So rather than a specific food being up here on this pedestal, thinking if I have one bite of it, that's it, I'm just going to not be able to stop. Food just becomes normal. These special foods, or maybe the foods that we used to binging on, just become a normal food that we know we can eat as much or as little as we want at any time, which then breaks that cycle of binge eating. And intuitive eating, although it's focused on eating, as I said before, it also works with our emotional needs because food and emotion is so tied together. We can't separate them. So intuitive eating does help us identify our emotions, to understand when there's an emotional need that we have and how that feels in our body as well. And then we can explore other coping tools outside of food if that's something that we need.
Wow, that's amazing. Like it seems like there's tons of benefits. And I really like how you mentioned the triggers to binge eating and how intuitive eating can help refocus ourselves back into listening to our body cues. And from what it seems, from what you said, that once we listen to our body cues, then our body starts to feel relaxed. It won't be on this like starvation mode. It won't basically binge eat anymore. Like there's so many benefits that intuitive eating can provide to us. I'm just thinking, like, for the people who are living in the UK, since we're both based in the UK, do you think there is this taboo of intuitive eating, or do you think culture, UK culture, would benefit from intuitive eating? What do you think?
Yeah, so particularly in the UK as well as some other countries as well, but if we think of the UK, we really do live in a diet culture. So if we think about the messages that we're surrounded by from from when we're born, essentially, we're told that there's this ideal way that our body should look. We're told that if our body doesn't meet this really narrow standard of what's considered, say, healthy or most worthy in our society, that then it's our fault essentially. We're all able to get there, but this or perhaps a muscular physique as well. That's actually getting more common now. But this sort of thin ideal and muscular ideal, they're really only achievable and accessible for a really really small amount of the population. And there's also just ideals around food. We get a lot of healthy eating messages, which perhaps on the surface level can seem quite um, maybe helpful. But on the flip side of that, we're really shaming the other foods as well. We're acting like there's no place at all for fun foods, for comfort foods, for foods that bring us connection with others, for foods that maybe soothe our emotions. So all of these other foods, and just thinking of some of the kind of ones that are shamed, with things like cakes and chocolates and sweets. These can be made that if we're eating them, we should feel shame over that and we should be trying harder. But these will provide a really important place in our life as well. Even if they don't have the same maybe nutritional value as other foods, they still have a health value in that way. Um, so coming back to the UK, our diet culture, which really makes us feel shame over the way we eat, shame over our body, leads us to feel that we have to maybe control our body. So we have to take that into our own hands. And if we just try hard enough, we're going to be able to make our body reach a certain place, or we're going to be able to eat in a way which is ideal for our society's standards. This is really, really common. So we're left with a lot of people who feel this disconnect towards their body because they haven't been grown up in a world that they're taught that they can listen to their body, they can connect with their body. And this can stem even further into being disconnected from our emotions. It's all the same kind of feedback systems in our body of recognizing things like our hunger and our fullness, as well as recognizing things like our emotions and other higher needs as well. Um, if we look, the Mental Health UK Mental Health Foundation found that about in over just the last year, about 1 in 5 adults will feel shame towards their body, and about 1/3 will feel really down or low, for the way their body or the way they feel their body looks. And this body dissatisfaction is then associated with unhealthy eating behaviors and distorted eating behaviors. While body satisfaction and appreciation for our body, appreciation for what it can do rather than just the way it looks, is associated with less dieting behaviors and then improved well-being as well. So, yeah, in the UK, we're constantly told we should control our body rather than connect with our body. So, because of that, our innate ability to eat intuitively has, for a lot of people, being taken away. And that's where the process of intuitive eating helps to bring us back so we can unlearn these messages that have created this disconnect and then relearn how to tune back into our body.
Mm. Really like how you just mentioned about like how some of the healthy eating guidelines can sometimes inaccurately like shame those fun foods you mentioned earlier. And it's all about like going back to just listening to your body. But one of the most common rebuttals I hear about intuitive eating is that if people are going to start eating the foods they enjoy, the fun foods, foods they love, they're worried that they might not stop eating. For example, they can't be able to stop eating pizzas, chocolates, brownies. They think they'd lose control. How does intuitive eating fit for those kinds of people?
Yeah, definitely. Um, and going back to what you just said, sorry, a moment ago, which was you mentioned something and now it's gone from my mind. Oh, sorry, you mentioned that intuitive eating is just about listening to our body and just about like following our body's guides. And there is actually place in intuitive eating to use our external knowledge. That's still okay. It's when we're using this external knowledge in place of what we're hearing from our own body that it becomes a problem. So if we consider that our body should be our number one guide, but we're lucky enough now to have, well, so much knowledge and understanding of what our body needs or the way foods work. There's so much access to so many foods as well that, of course, we can have this knowledge that, okay, maybe I'm not craving vegetables right now, but I know that adding some vegetables into my meal that I've made sure I've got satisfying foods for me is actually going to make me feel better afterwards. It's going to make me feel more satisfied afterwards. So I'm going to add some in. Doesn't mean we have to add them in, but using this kind of external knowledge, or it might be a specific nutrient that um, we know is important for us to make sure we get enough of. I don't know, for example, like iron. A lot of people can struggle to get enough iron, especially women. It might be, okay, I'm going to make sure I want to focus on getting enough foods that are high in iron, and that's fine to use this external knowledge. The problem is if we hear our body saying, I'm hungry, and then we say, oh, but you shouldn't be hungry. You just ate an hour ago. Why are you hungry again already? And we start beating ourselves up. So yeah, I usually say our body's our number one guide. And once we've developed that connection again, and I think that's really important that we need to let go of outside rules. But we always need to let go of the rules and let go of outside messages initially while we tune back in. But once we've got there, then we can start allowing these external messages back in, but in a way that they support us rather than that they take over, and that can be a process in itself. But yes, going back to your question you just asked me, about being worried about not being able to stop eating these foods that maybe we've been binging on. Maybe it's things like pizzas or brownies. Of course, that's scary. If we've had this experience with something, of course, it's going to feel really triggering thinking about bringing them back in. It makes complete sense to worry that we're always going to be out of control around that food. And that's where it can be important to work through some of the underlying triggers as well. Work out what the triggers are. Is it that we're biologically hungry? Is the trigger the specific food because we've got this good, bad headspace around that food? Is it more of an emotional trigger? Getting clear on that first so that we can start to work on those underlying triggers first. And then we can start taking the power away from these foods. We know that when we restrict these foods, they're more likely to be a binge food. They're more likely to be something we feel really out of control around when we've got access to that. So we can start by removing the deprivation mindset around there, starting to give ourselves unconditional permission to have those foods whenever we want, ensuring that we're biologically nourished if we're not eating enough in the daytime or we're following food rules. Making sure that we're getting satisfaction from food in general. It's not just that one specific food that's the problem. It might be that we're not allowing satisfaction in as a whole. Um, and if food is serving an emotional purpose as well, just exploring other coping tools that we need. It's not it's not going to be, I know it can feel like it's going to be like this way forever, but actually, when we look at the underlying triggers, we work on the underlying triggers, we work on stopping these foods from being on this pedestal, from being something that's an all or nothing, good or bad. These foods do actually just become a normal part of eating and a normal part of our life. And then they can be eaten in ways that are more comfortable or enjoyable. So the goal is not cutting these foods out. The goal is that they become just a normal food that we can eat with attunement, and we can enjoy, and we can stop at a place that feels comfortable for us.
Yeah, that's really, really reassuring for people who are listening, who are worried about trying to eat more. And I think basically you just covered everything. You just covered so many people's worries about their triggers, emotional triggers, mental triggers, hunger, which is one of their physical triggers. So that's really, really reassuring. But for people who might be concerned, who is intuitive eating for and who is intuitive eating not for? Does it cover every single person, or does it only cover a certain group of people?
Yeah. So I think firstly coming back to the process of intuitive eating itself is to relearn our body's natural and innate hunger cues. So if we're someone who's able to tune into that and we don't feel this stress around food, or we don't feel this kind of fight between the external rules and our own body, we're probably already eating quite intuitively. It doesn't mean that no support is there for you if you want to explore further. But yeah, it's really for the people for who these external rules are creating this fight between what their body's asking for and what they're told or what they feel they should do based on these external rules. So for most people who are able to, say, eat and digest food normally, most people can have a goal of becoming an intuitive eater. But there are some groups who would really need to get some professional support to work through some underlying triggers at first. So the two general groups that would come to mind here are those with active eating disorders and those with past trauma, especially when there's been a distrust or a trauma response in the body. So, for example, those with eating disorders, particularly restrictive eating disorders. So, if we think of things like anorexia or other eating disorders where food is highly restricted, intuitive eating can usually be a longer term goal for people. And there's some aspects of intuitive eating that can definitely be so useful at any stage of recovery if they're able to, I guess, recognize their true self thoughts outside of their eating disorder. So this could be things like rejecting diet culture, removing deprivation around food, challenging the food police. These can be worked on from the start. But trusting things like hunger and fullness are not going to be possible until the eating disorder voice has no say in guiding our food and body choices. And then if we look at those with trauma, control of the body can be a lot deeper than diet culture. So specialist support there may be required to work through that trauma and that control of the body first, for one example, before we're able to develop that trust and connection with our body in a safe way.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting because I assumed intuitive eating would be for everyone, but I guess it does make sense that if you have an active eating disorder, then you have this eating disorder voice going against your natural body's response, telling you to do another thing completely different from what your body's telling you. And I guess people with eating disorders have dysregulated hunger hormones after, for example, if they have anorexia nervosa, the eating disorder. I guess your body's in starvation mode. It just wants to eat everything inside because they're so undernourished. And it also does make sense what you mentioned about trauma, and for them to just go through and have professional help for that trauma first before listening and being in tune with your body in terms of listening to your mental needs, your emotional needs, and your physical needs. That's really, really interesting. Thanks, Emma, for that. So you mentioned earlier that people need to start listening to their body, but if they've been struggling with dieting for so long or binge eating for so long, it seems like it's probably inevitable that they're going to start to eat a little more and probably gain a little bit of weight. What do you have to say for people who are very concerned or anxious about gaining weight?
Yeah. Firstly, it's really, really natural in our culture, in our diet culture, to feel this way. So we've been taught that we're not able to trust our own body to reach a weight on its own that either meets society's ideals or is comfortable for our body. The thing is that when we're connected with our body, it will guide us to a weight and shape that best supports us in the moment at that time of our life to live, I guess, in the most authentic way possible, where we've got the most energy, where we've got the most headspace and passion in other areas of life. But this weight might not be where, and actually it's extremely likely it's not where society says that we should be, because society's ideals are very narrow around what our body should look like. But then staying in this place of control with the body, such as by like dieting or restricting to try to shrink the body or control the body, or to prevent weight gain as well. It's not just about weight loss. It can also just be to not gain anymore. Is more likely actually in the long term to lead to a higher weight rather than any sustained weight loss. But it really just keeps us stuck in this place where our basic needs are not being unconditionally met. So life becomes about our body fighting for abundance around food because that's so important for survival, and us trying to control food and control our body. So when we let go of control on our body, and then we also develop tools to navigate our diet culture because that's so important. We live in this diet culture that places so much value and worthiness on weight. Of course, it's important. Weight can become a lot less important, and actually, our body image starts to improve at that point. I think it is important, though, recovery, if we're in a larger body compared to if we're in a smaller body, is different, is completely possible, but there's extra challenges for someone who is in a larger body, and that's something that we shouldn't ignore. It's something that we should be helping to explore and to work through. Um, Sometimes it can help to think about what we actually want from, if weight loss has been our goal for so long, what are we hoping weight loss will give us? And has it given us that yet? Is there any other way that we can get that without focusing on weight loss and allowing our body to just sit naturally where it does when we're giving it all of the nutrients and self-care that it does need? And everyone's body can react differently depending what our current eating behaviors are, depending on our genetics, depending on how long we've been in this fight with our body, depending on who knows what factors we can't that are completely out of our control. Some people's bodies, we might lose weight. Some people will stay the same and some people will gain weight. But as we go through the process, weight becomes less important. Our body image improves, whatever happens with our body. And we learn to navigate the pressures from our culture as well, and explore what else we can get from life outside of the way our body physically looks.
Oh, that's amazing, because many people choose to lose weight or are trying their best to lose weight to improve their body image. But what it sounds from what you've been saying, that intuitive eating is the way to improve your body image, or it is one of the ways in which it can improve your body image. Like chasing weight loss is kind of like a pipe dream. It's not a real, it won't solve body image issues.
Yeah, yeah. And if we look at long-term research into dieting, actually, it's very hard to find long-term research into dieting because they usually cut it off when the trend has kind of, or the weight has kind of come down. But when we do explore past that 1 year or 2 year mark, we find that it's very, very common. It's actually the majority of people who do end up regaining that weight in anyone who has sustained weight loss, or in the research studies of people who maybe do keep their weight off for longer. We don't actually have studies that explore the mental health of those people as well, what behaviors they're doing, whether the behaviors they're using are supportive or not.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Well, thanks so much for like sharing all of that. That really opened my eyes, and I'm probably gonna have to listen to this all over again because there's so much amazing information that you just shared with us, Emma. Well, you just mentioned so many amazing things about intuitive eating and how it can stop disordered eating habits and binge eating. That's so amazing. And if people want to work with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, of course, they're very welcome to, or firstly, check out my website and have a look at how I work. There's more information and some little videos on there as well, if that helps. My website is at Food Life Freedom. So it's www.foodlifefreedom, all one word.com. Or my Instagram as well is the other place, which is food.life.freedom. So
Yeah, that's amazing. I think there should be more intuitive eating counselors because there's not many here in the world, especially in the UK. It's such a
yeah,
specific thing. And for such a specific thing, there's so many benefits to intuitive eating that it can just improve your body image. It can improve your outlook on life. You'll feel better mentally, physically, and emotionally. You don't have to be in this hamster wheel of dieting and
yeah,
restricting. So there's so many amazing things. So if you're
definitely.
struggling with binge eating or disordered eating, or you're just worried about your eating, then definitely head off to book a call with Emma or check out her resources.
Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been so nice to chat to you tonight.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it also. So thanks so much, Emma. So is there one final thing that you'd want to say to people who are listening to this podcast?
You don't have to stay stuck in this dieting pattern, or this dieting cycle forever. It can feel that the only way to be happy will be when our body reaches this place that we've got all this pressure from society to reach, or until we eat in a way that feels like we meet society's ideals. But actually, the more we fight against it, the more we're just staying stuck in this cycle. It can seem really counterintuitive at first to break away from that, but it's completely possible. It's completely possible to break out of that cycle, to focus on other things in life, to have more headspace for the rest of our life again, whatever that looks like for us. And to move away from dieting, especially when that's feeling really stressful, or we are s- spending our life just being focused on what our body looks like rather than what we can do.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emma, for coming along to the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been so nice.
If you found this podcast helpful, you would definitely benefit from my binge eating freedom course in my website, bingedietitian.com. Learn more about the triggers to why you're binge eating and how to stop binge eating for good. No more food guilt, no more jumping from diet to diet, and no more shame. Go to the link in this episode for my binge eating freedom course to be one step closer to being binge free, starting today.